Oh, okay. All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, you guys, and for contacting me, and Ollie for setting this up. One of the most common questions people ask me is, what was my inspiration? What was my goal? Or, sometimes I'll say, were you crazy? Or, so my ties to the headwaters, this is Lake Itasca headwaters right here, go way back. I went there as a child myself. And then my husband, Dan, and I brought our own daughters there every year from the time they were really little till they were adults. And we'd always go in the spring because that's when the trillium and the lady slippers were blooming. And there's a lot of biking there. And at one point, it's not clicking. Hang on. I just have to adjust something here.
No problem, take your time.
Oh, here we go. So you're still seeing my whole screen, right?
Yep, we're seeing you standing on the bridge now.
Yep. Okay, and normally I wouldn't put a family picture up here, but what is notable in this picture is there's a canoe on the right side of the screen heading down the river, and there was a crew loading here ready to take off, and I was peppering them with questions and probably annoying them. They probably had their game faces on and ready to roll, but they were very gracious, and that was my first inspiration. I thought, that'd be kind of a neat thing to do. And so this is my husband, Dan, and our daughter, Laura. And this kind of just shows how thick the vegetation there is and how narrow the river, really is in the beginning. And then fast forward to 2015, I met Laura at Itasca State Park in Wisconsin. And we did a sunrise hike up on the bluffs, and it was just astonishingly beautiful. And then later in the day, we kayaked in the backwaters and then went out on the river. And that's when I knew that I would at least paddle from the headwaters to Winona. I thought that would just be something special. So then in 2017, I really started just gathering some information, reading books. I read on the top left here, One Woman's River, was written by Ellen Mcdonough, who was the first known woman anyway, to paddle solo in 2014. She's also an amazing artist. So I read her book, took notes, also read Corey Kolodzi's book. And he did the river way back in '78 when things were really different. And I just wanted to learn some songs. So I was writing down words to songs, just gathering gear. There's also a lock and dam chart, which was very helpful so that I would know which radio station I needed to be on to contact the lock master. And then once in a while, I would actually have to call them on the phone. And maps were kind of the crucial piece of equipment for me. I love maps and I love paper maps. A lot of people now, they just get downloadable versions, but I really did not want to be tied to my phone. I wanted to be away from devices as much as I could. So I would just strap these on the front of the canoe, and they were very helpful. The Minnesota DNR maps, there are 10 of them, and they go from the headwaters down to Minneapolis, and are just super helpful. They're not detailed, but they have mile markers, and the DNR established campsites on them. And I just put lots of notes from other people. And then the Corps of Engineer maps, there are 2 sets of those, and they're huge. I think they're 11 by 16 or something, and very heavy. So every 2 weeks I would change them out. And they were great to have on the canoe or on my kayak because it just gave me something to focus on all day long. I didn't bring earpieces to listen to music or anything. I just wanted to live super simply. That was my goal of the trip. And so it was really fun to cross-reference my maps with what I was seeing. And they're detailed nautically, but not, you don't get to see what cities you're passing. That's what I kind of missed with those. And there was the other thing is this George Armand and Sheila Armand are two very good friends, and he lives in La Crosse. And the bulk of my paddling experience, almost all, was in the Boundary Waters canoe area. And so just flat water. And I really wanted to learn about currents and navigating the river. And I visited a couple locks and dams, took pool sessions, just to learn how to self-rescue. So then, and this is just gathering food and gear and emails. And I also, another key piece were these videos that Jake Hangler made. He paddled the river a year before I did and took a lot of time and energy to make these very comprehensive videos that were super, super helpful. And here's the big day. Fast forward to May 30th, 2020. And this is Jan Baldwin, one of my very good paddling friends. And she spent a week with me heading down the river. And this is just how sweet it is. It's just a cozy little river. And we're fortunate, I think, to leave in May because all the grasses are relatively short. So you had much better visibility. And then this is just a typical DNR campsite along the way. This was our first campsite. We went 15 miles that day. And so normally they have a shelter and a latrine and they're mowed, but that isn't always the case. Some are not kept up at all, or the banks are too undercut to even get up to them. And this is another DNR site, really one of my favorite sites. This was near Bemidji, and it just offered this splendid view. And then just to give you an idea, when we were in canoes, I was able to bring more gear. And so this was a jet boil with an adapter on it, so we could put a fry pan on there. And this was the northernmost point on the Mississippi. This was also near Bemidji. So you travel north. It's kind of like a question mark up there. You travel north for probably 3 days before you get to start heading south. So I touched 10 states along the way, and it's 2,341 miles, second only to the Missouri River. I think the Missouri edges it out by maybe 100 miles. And there's our plentiful mosquitoes, but here's the reward. Just these amazing sunsets. And here's going across Winnebagochish, and that's about 10 miles across. And that day we hugged the northern shore because we had a north wind. And people have gotten in big trouble because it's such a big, wide, circular kind of body of water. People get caught out in the middle and get into trouble. So we behaved. And then this is just kind of one of the smaller dams along the Mississippi. This was in Grand Rapids, and that portage there was about 100 yards just going across a parking lot. And this was portaging about a half a mile on the second dam in Grand Rapids. And if you guys have any questions, just feel free to ask them. I don't want to totally dominate everything. And we took a week off, or I took a week off. It was close to a week to wait out thunderstorms and then wait for these two friends to come. This is Betty Kroll. Ann McNally knows her. And Suzanne Starr. This is Betty's husband, Gene, and he was part of the send-off crew. And this is the kind of camping that we just totally enjoyed, just on the sandbar. And because we could carry gear, we had a Dutch oven and baked out a pizza. You don't go on a canoe trip with Betty Crow without making pizza. And one of the best parts of the whole trip were the river angels. They're just people along the way who just want to help. So you can kind of see the river in the background there. And this Lori, she took us in. I camped on the lawn because I actually preferred to be on a tent in a tent instead of on a cushy bed. And but I sure took advantage of the shower and her really good cooking. And then this is just, we saw so many of these tree roots all along the way. The river was low, so it was a whole different look for us than others who traveled before.
Anne, I have a question about these river angels.
Yes.
Are these people who just wave you down as you're paddling past, or do you have a sense of where they are, or is there like a group, or how did you find them?
Well, there is a Facebook site called Mississippi. There are two sites, Mississippi River Angels and the Mississippi River Paddlers. And so when you start, you just kind of say, oh, here's the big day. I'm heading down the river. And they kind of watch you. And I didn't share my my Garmin link with anybody except for close friends, because I kind of didn't want people to know exactly where I was. But I also, ahead of time, some of these river angels I had read about for years. So I already had their phone numbers, to contact them. And some I just wanted to visit. We didn't stay overnight. I just wanted to meet these people. And this is just a private campground in Aitkin. Just a different way to stop for the night. And this just shows really the river this is almost like a hairpin turn here on the river. And we just lunched. And then we also stayed in state parks. And this is Lindbergh State Park. And always on a stop, it was a lot of work. Your mind is always in plan mode. So I was always kind of planning the next move. And my husband showed up here and then resupplied us. So it's always food and maps and that sort of stuff. And here's just on the other side of a dam portage. And this was a private campground and we were right on the river. All we had to do was hoist our canoe up. And the water was low in 2020. 2019 was flood and 2020 was dry. And this was below the St. Cloud Dam. And we actually had to portage in the river. And here's another DNR site. And I basically hung the food to keep the small critters out. I really didn't think we'd have trouble with bigger animals, but it was kind of reassuring to know that the mice weren't going to get in there or, whatever else. And this is Doris on a very early morning paddle as we were heading to the cities. And this was just a great moment. 483 miles we'd come from Itasca, and to see that Minneapolis skyline come into view was absolutely thrilling. There was a lot of hooting and hollering. And then my nephew surprised us. He was up on the Franklin Avenue Bridge. I had no idea he was going to be there. And so this really gives a good perspective of how small we were on the big river. And this is the Ford Lock and Dam. It's the first one on the river. And it's a 38-foot drop. So it's a significant drop. And St. Anthony Falls is the only natural falls on the river, on the whole Mississippi. And then this is just Mother Nature providing a table. And this is a great view that my husband Dan took a picture he took that really shows the size of those lock chambers. And these are the cream of the crop friends. I'm on the left, and then Suzanne and Sheila and Doris. And this is just a beautiful morning on the river. It was so fun to just camp back in the woods and listen to the trains and barges all night. If I didn't need to sleep, I wouldn't have. And here's a pretty typical storm on the river. This was on Lake Pepin, which is 21 miles long, but it's narrower. It's not like Winnebagochish where you can't see the other side. But because it's so shallow, it really kicks up waves. And I just like this picture because it shows that Mother Nature won and we had to turn around. We were taking on water. And so we set up supper and ate and waited for the wind to die down and headed on our way. And this is where we ended up, and everything was soaked. And any of you who've paddled know what this is. It's just a drying day. And this shows what the barges looked like in the upper river. The biggest they could be through all the locks and dams were 15 containers. And then once I was through all the locks and dams south of St. Louis, it was maybe up to 42. So that they were huge. But this is a Minnesota 3 canoe, so it held 3 people and cargo very well. And there's the bluffs down by Winona that I hadn't dreamed of paddling to. And here's the Winona Factory. I don't know if any of you guys have Winona canoes or kayaks made by Winona, but here's the plant right here. And this guy is the brains behind the business. He created this process and it's fascinating. And then I took 2 weeks off to change out my canoe for a kayak. And it was like taking a whole new trip because it was all different gear. I was very, very limited on space, and I'm kind of a disaster planner and I like to have a lot of just in case stuff. And that just had to go by the wayside. It was very, very streamlined. And this is Sheila and George, the brother, sister, friends, and Mike Chickanowski, the guy who owns Winona, and Mike Lohman also works there. And this is Ella Mcdonough, the one who wrote the book. And she wanted to paddle for a few days. And so we just had a great time paddling. It was terrible winds for us. We had headwinds every day. And she loves to sing, and we just sang our way down the river. And this is John Sullivan, who runs the Mississippi River Paddler site on Facebook, which that was my other very reliable source of information and support. And this was another big deal, is hitting the border. So this is 674 miles into the trip before you get out of Minnesota. So really, Minnesota is sort of a third of your time on the river. And this is just a typical mile marker. And this was Crooked Slough. And the river doesn't seem that wide. And then all of a sudden, it's just so wide and so full of, it's backwaters and just an incredible expanse of water. And I can't believe how lucky I was to paddle it with no wind. That was probably one of my favorite days on the river. And I also camped at marinas a few times. That's what this was. But this was my favorite, just cozying up on the sand, back in the grass a little bit to keep the sand out of my tent. There's a morning with a pelican. And just another, this is down in Cordova, Illinois, or Cordova is actually across the river. And a lot of people, it was a very popular beach. I kind of hesitated to stay there because there were so many people around, but nobody bothered me. And most people are just so curious. And one young couple went home and brought me all kinds of fresh fruit, and people are just so curious. It was really fun to meet people along the river. And this is a really good, just comprehensive shot. On the right is the green channel marker. So green on the right and red on the left on the descending. And my map up there and a lock in the distance. And I was waiting for that tow to pass through the lock. And then you get to see these historic places. This is Rock Island, Illinois. Just to see things from the river is really neat. And the other thing I was kind of surprised about is the maple trees all through Minnesota and then well down into Iowa. And they just provided such wonderful camp spots. And this is just an example of what happens when you're on and near the water for every day of the week, 24 hours a day. And there was a lot of heat. It was very, very hot. And I did use electrolyte tabs. It's called Nuun, N-U-U-N. And I like those a lot because they weren't sweet. They just gave me what I needed because I drank so much. And then the farther south I got, this was far more typical. The houses up on stilts. It was really, it's like a whole different culture. And here's a heron keeping me company at night. And just this pretty vegetation along the river. And this is Keokuk, Iowa. And this building is on the National Registry, Historic Registry. And this is going through the lock. And that was my view as I entered the lock. And that's also a 38-foot drop. It's quite amazing. I think a woman in Hastings at that lock and dam said, what was it? They empty out 6 million gallons in 8 minutes or something like that. It's just an incredible amount of water that is moved, and it's free. You go through the locks for free. And in almost all the locks, they would throw down a rope, and you would just hang on to the rope, let it slide to your hand as you descended, just to kind of anchor you a little bit to the wall. But in a couple locks and dams, these were like canisters that went up and down with the water levels. This was just a nice lunch in the shade. Typical lunch for me was tortillas and almond butter or peanut butter and tuna packets, chicken packets, that sort of thing. And, you know, I show all these pictures of dreamy sandy beaches, but there was a lot of mud. And this is coming into Hannibal, which was a especially nice afternoon because the weather was so nice. And I knew Dan, my husband, was going to be in Hannibal, so I didn't have to think about where I was going to camp. And you'll see there I have a solar charger. So that's the two big things on the river are battery usage and having a fresh water supply. And I ended up changing out this charger for a bigger one. I just needed something more efficient. But the only thing I needed to charge was my Garmin and my cell phone. And there we are. It's Tom Sawyer's Fence. And this is a view from Hannibal up on the bluffs. And my mantra was sort and stack, dry and resupply. So anytime Dan showed up, that's what happened. And this is one of the last lock and dams. And here's the Missouri River Confluence, which it's not as obvious as I would have thought. I really had to look for that. It's right above St. Louis. And then I don't know if you guys have heard of the chain of rocks, but it's a man-made low water dam to keep the water levels up for the tows to go through the lock. So this bypass channel to the left goes to the last lock. And when the water levels are favorable, most paddlers take the chain of rocks. And it was kind of iffy for me, and I was by myself, and I just didn't want to be upside down in the Mississippi River. So I took the bypass, which it's somewhere between 8 and 10 miles. And I can say it's the only time on the entire river I was bored. It's just a straight channel levied on both sides. It's just, there's nothing to look at. But here was the reward. Coming into St. Louis, I just could hardly believe I was actually there. And then these would be what I would share my camp spots with. Looks like coyote tracks and various water birds. And then there was the Ohio confluence, and that is when the Mississippi got really big. And actually, that was the first time I really felt out of my element, just because I remember consciously thinking, I can't wait till I can get back up to the boundary waters in Minnesota, because the shorelines were so far away. And then, so there'd be all this traffic and, barges, and then there'd be nothing. And I'd end up, visiting with people having sandbar parties in the middle of nowhere. And again, having to find water. I stashed my kayak. You cannot leave kayaker gear out. It's really not uncommon at all for stuff to get stolen. And so I just walked into town. It was a few blocks and got some water. And I am not a pop drinker at all. And Sprite tasted just like fruit of the gods. And here's some windmill blades going down the river, just the different kinds of commodities. And a lot of debris is left behind by the flooding. And here's even a cattle gate. And then getting to Memphis, that was another big landmark. So that was about 2 weeks from Hannibal. So then Dan met me again there to resupply. And this river angel, Dale Sanders, he's famous. Like, everybody knows who Dale Sanders is. So it was really fun to meet him. And he, this year now, is going to try to re-break the record for the oldest person to go down the Mississippi solo. And I think he's 85 now. And last year he did the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim. And just last year, his AT record was broken. Some guy older than him hiked the whole Appalachian Trail. And I'd never been to Memphis. I'd never been south at all. So, I mean, the Sun Studio, where all the greats walked through the door, Elvis Presley got his start right here, and being on Beale Street. And there was nothing going on because of COVID. And here, this was at Dale Sanders, just doing my homework. And then he's got this paddler's wall that, it's really a honor to sign this wall. It's all these people who have done not just the Mississippi, but other waterways as well. And there's the red pointed buoys and the squared off reddish ones, and they're just the channel markers. And generally speaking, I would stay to the outside, so I would know that I'd be out of the way of barges. But if there was a good straight stretch and I didn't see any traffic, I'd just go into the channel, because the current was so much better. And here's another just sweet little camp spot. And I got to paddle up the Yazoo River into historic Vicksburg. That's a big Civil War site, and had wonderful river angels there as well. And this just gives a good perspective on how small you look on the big river. And as I got farther south, this was one of the only times I could find shade without actually getting out of my kayak. And this is just one of those pretty mornings. And here's troublemaker Hurricane Laura. So I was up here in Natchez. Well, actually, I was in Vicksburg when this was happening. And then I beelined it to Natchez. And Peggy Pierpont, she was going to host me for one night, and it ended up being 4 to wait out the hurricane. And she is standing right on this boat landing. And in 2019, so a year earlier, the water level was where she is standing. So it's really remarkable how much it changes. And she lives in this old antebellum house, just charming. And here's some more work done by the Corps of Engineer. They're just like little beavers. They're always at work. It wasn't uncommon to see just barges full of rocks for, more revetment. And here they built a big wall to protect all these antebellum homes from erosion. And this was kind of a little joke. She posted this on Facebook. And this is a full moon night on just camping on the sand. And I had a rudder cable pull out on me, so that needed to be repaired. And this is a great shot of what the barges look like farther south. And just look how huge that is. They're just massive. And I just find this fascinating. So one 15 barge tow carries the same amount as 870 semis. So it's really easy to see why commerce is so important on the river. But all these comparisons are just, 100 car unit trains that, it's pretty neat. And then this is where there isn't revetment or the wing dams, or this is kind of what a lot of the shoreline looked like. And it was hard to find a campsite sometimes. And here's Baton Rouge, just to show you what a busy port it is. And this was me up here. And this, in case anybody's interested, this is the Find Ship app. And it was really nice. All these little triangles here are mile markers. So I could radio a barge and say, I'm southbound left bank, at whatever mile marker, because they really liked knowing where paddlers were. And it wasn't reliable as far as how many ships or who was in the area. So I did not use it for that purpose. And here's the port of Baton Rouge. This was kind of a terrifying day. And then this just shows the difference between a little tiny kayak and a great big ship. And you can see I'm up on the revetment here. And that would go back for 10, 20 yards. And so you have to drag your kayak over the rocks to get to a sandy spot. And I had this idea in my head that as you got farther south, the river would straighten out just by the volume of water, but it's a very crooked river and problematic for the tows. It was the only time I think I really saw a couple of tugboats just helping them navigate these turns. It was so backed up. It took me 45 minutes just to be able to cross the river to get up to this island to camp. And there's hundreds of plantations down there, but you don't see any of them from the river. I climbed up on the levee to take a look. And these folks down south are just a hoot. They're just so down to earth. So they fetched me off the river and drove me over the levee and brought me to their place, and I stayed in their camper. And these guys I was going through Baton Rouge and they just called me over, invited me to supper, and I declined supper, but they threw me water and fresh fruit. Just super guys. And that just shows you how big we're sharing the river with these giants. And this is New Orleans. So New Orleans here, the French Quarter would be over in here, Algiers Point right there. And I got to see my cousin, who I hadn't seen in 40 years, right here in Audubon Park. And it was just a little oasis off the river. And what's fascinating to me is when you're on the river, all you know is the riverbank and the trees. And well, in this case, a lot of docks and ships and stuff, but you just, it's hard to imagine when you're on the river, all of this sprawling development. And this is the French Quarter. And here I am, south of New Orleans. This was when I just took my big breath of relief, like, thank God I'm finally out of there. And I just had this beach to myself, and those ships are right there. I can't believe that they're not stuck in the sand, but somehow it's dredged deep enough. And then there's more. I always was happy when I could see they were anchored, because then I knew I didn't have to contend with a moving object. And I also had to be concerned about the tide water. And so I had to educate myself about tides and looking at the schedule. And I actually moved my tent during the night. I wasn't sure I was up far enough. I knew I was up far enough, but when those barges and ships go by, they just leave such a big wake that I felt like it was splashing right into the tent. And this is Pilot Town, where river pilots stay. So when those big ships come in off the ocean, they don't know how to navigate the river. And so there are separate pilots just for navigating the ships up the river. And this is only reached by boat. There are no roads. And this was bigger to me than getting to the Gulf. Mile Zero, it's about 80 miles south of New Orleans. And it's just, it was this huge expanse of water. And I'll show you here. So I was right here at Mile Zero, and then it's the Birdsfoot Delta. So all the ship traffic goes out this Southwest Pass, and almost nothing goes down the South Pass because it's getting silted in. So it's just fishing boats, and that's where I went down, and I camped right in here. And this was, I'm sure it's a man-made campsite because it's all cane down there. There would be nowhere to camp. And I only saw a couple alligators. I actually thought I would see more. And there's another huge container ship. I mean, they displace so much water that it actually goes out like there's a tidal wave or something, and then it comes crashing in. And there I am in the Gulf. And so this is a view from an abandoned lighthouse. So the picture that you just saw me, I was down in here, and I really wanted to go out into the Gulf, but the rollers were too big, and I just didn't want it to end badly on my final day. And then this is Bubby, our shrimp boat captain, who brought Dan down from Venice. So Venice is literally the end of the road. It's about 23 miles from the Gulf. So Dan got to see what I saw along this whole stretch. This is looking north. So that was pretty neat. And then I went back to Memphis and finished the date on the wall. So that's my trip. That's it. So I don't know if you guys have questions or.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ann. We'll take a few minutes here, and if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, feel free.
Let's see, I just stopped share. There we go. Now I can see people.
Hey, Ann, this
Yeah.
is Robin Stanton. Did you meet other paddlers on your trip? You talked about the River Angels, but did you meet anybody else that was paddling the river?
I did not. And that was my one disappointment. I couldn't believe it because everybody I read about, they just somehow end up running into some other paddler. I did not see one other canoe, kayak the whole trip, unless it was planned, unless people actually planned.
And there's a question in the chat asking how long the whole trip took. I think you said it was 3 months. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was about 80 paddling days, 80 or 85 paddling days.
So Anne, this is Linda. And how often did you have to stop and like replenish your food? I know you said you needed water, to get your water quite frequently, but how did you deal with getting food once you were on the river?
So my husband, Dan, replenished me every couple weeks until Memphis. And then it was just getting so far for him to drive. So he mailed me stuff to Natchez, which was another couple weeks down the river. And I had enough then to get the rest of the way. So and it was, boring food, the kind you add hot water to, and,
Mhm.
but it worked and it was healthy. And for breakfast, they're called, what is it? Meals on the go or meals to go green belly meals. They're super expensive, but they're a super high calorie bar. They're like 600 calories a piece. So I
Wow.
would eat half before I'd even take off in the morning, and then I'd eat the other half while I was paddling. But they were just, I got really good nutrition on the river, I felt like. And then as far as water, I carried 7 gallons of water. That's what they suggest you carry on the lower river. And that's a lot of weight, 56 pounds, so that was a big consideration.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A couple more came through the chat, and I don't know if you can see it, but one was, why did you switch to a kayak?
Because I did want to do the river solo from that point on. And because I already had the kayak, that's what I used. And it was a current design squall. So it was 16.5 feet. And it's the kind of the little sister version of the Storm. And the Storm would have had a lot more cargo space, but I just felt so comfortable in that squall. And it really, man, it handled anything that nature gave me. Though I hit some really big wakes, especially from the tugs. And I never capsized in it. So very grateful for that. I came close. I came really close.
Yeah, speaking of almost capsizing, another question was, what was the biggest hiccup on the trip?
What was the biggest hiccup? I would say the rudder cable, and you can paddle just fine without a rudder, and actually it's less drag, but for quick motions, like I would just have to kick that, kick it around if I was hitting a wake, or and I really felt like it saved my arms. So I didn't have to do the steering with my arms. It was my feet. So that was why I used that. But I would have considered a solo canoe if I'd had one or had experience in it.
This is Anne's husband, Scott. So what's next?
Well, I'd like to do parts of the Missouri River, but if I actually started at the headwaters, once you start, you kind of want to keep going, that sort of thing. But I actually visited the Three Forks, which is the headwaters of the Missouri River. But if you really want the true headwaters, it's up at Brower Springs. And so I've thought about doing a week from there. And there's also, I'm on the Missouri River Paddler site, and they're having a rendezvous, their second rendezvous ever. They had one 5 years ago that goes, I think it ends up in Sioux City, Iowa or something like that. So and that's at the end of the summer. So I'm kind of thinking about doing that. but it's just so rugged and beautiful. The Missouri is just a whole different animal.
You're right.
Have any of you guys done the Missouri or parts of it? No.
I've done parts of it. We ended up at Fort Peck, but I can't remember where we started.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, then did the part that is the big cliffs that are, it was hot and there were an awful lot of farmlands.
Yes.
Very, very flat, but big.
Yep. There's a lot of huge water that takes 2-3 weeks to get across.
Mhm.
So
Did you lose weight on this trip?
I did. But I kept an eye on it. So when I could really tell I was losing, I didn't feel weak. I felt just fine. But I just started literally eating scoops of peanut butter or almond butter with my meals. And then when I did stop at River Angels, I just loaded up, like no more salads, man. I gotta eat, beef, and I just really, and I'm a smaller person, so I think that's why I didn't lose that much weight. Bigger people lose more weight. It's kind of interesting how that works, but yeah. Yeah, it was actually a concern for a while. I was getting a little squirrely about it because I didn't want to start burning muscle. I needed my muscle.
Mhm.
How did your gear hold up?
Really well, especially for all the lightweight stuff I had. I had a super lightweight tent, was one of the big Agnes. And that I did have to replace the rain fly. I mean, they actually replaced the whole tent, but that was kind of a manufacturing defect. I took really good care of my stuff, and there were a few things, I guess, my shoes were done when I was at the end, and I lost a couple things to the river. But for the most part, my gear held up really well.
All right, talk. I have to unmute myself.
I also had one of those really lightweight air mattresses. I can't remember now, a Thermarest. And it never was compromised. It worked really well the whole way down. And I also, once I got in my kayak, I didn't even have a sleeping bag. And thank God it was warm, because I would have not had room for a sleeping bag. Like all I had was a bivy sack. And that was enough.
So how often are you asked to share your story? Because it's a great story, great, wonderful pictures.
Well, thanks. I've only done this a few times, really. And once was in Doris Kaloji's class. And we actually got one of the river pilots on FaceTime to talk to the kids about his perspective on the river. But I've done like AAUW, a couple smaller groups. So it's kind of fun to share it.
Well, I appreciate it because I'm really enjoying hearing you talk about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I certainly enjoyed it a great deal too. Have you read the book Rivers Running Free, about the women that paddled it on a lot of rivers back in the 1800s?
No, I
lot of-
haven't.
Too. Yeah, that's inspiring. It might find you some more rivers you want to do.
Yeah, that's all I need. My husband will be in the background rolling his eyes. So what's the name of what did you say the name of the book was?
Rivers Running Free, and I know it's by Judith Naomi,
Oh, okay. Okay.
and she's from up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I have a pile of books I need to read. I just haven't gotten
Yeah.
around to that yet.
Hey, Ann, I have a question. what was the worst it ever got? Did you ever feel like turning around and you just felt like bunching it? And then why didn't you?
I never felt like turning around or stopping. That never happened, but I had a real meltdown day. I just was tired and I was hot and I was tired of the muck and not being able to find a site and getting stuck on the sandbars. And then my rudder cable broke. And it was right before, and I think it was the stress of knowing I was coming to Baton Rouge. And so just all of that combined, I just melted down. And unfortunately, my whole family was on speakerphone when I didn't know that. I was talking to Dan and kind of pitching a fit. And then the next day was just a gift. Like the whole day was, and that's when I ended up on the full moon night, camping on a sandbar. It's like every time something was difficult, I got some big juicy reward.
Can you ask mine?
Did you have a question?
Hi, Ann. I had a question. Sometimes through the Girl Scout canoe base, we know that you can have water trouble, you can have wind trouble, you can have animals in camp. Did you have any trouble with two-legged animals on your trip, or any times where you felt like as a woman paddling by yourself that was a thing and that you had to think about more than you'd planned for?
I was surprised how little of a problem that was. I felt like I was cautious. I'm not a big risk taker. So I just felt like I was very cautious, but there was one night I was on an island and a guy came into camp and it was getting dark. And I thought he wouldn't in his boat because it was so shallow. It was a little bay that I was tucked into. And so I just grabbed my little ditty bag and ran back into the woods and hid for a while. And he wasn't leaving. And there were two people, but I never saw them. And I actually called 911 from the island. And I wasn't in panic mode. I just was trying to be smart. And so it was really hard for them to find me. First of all, they said, well, we don't know which jurisdiction you're in because, part of this island is in Missouri, part is, it was really kind of comical. And they took my location from my phone and it was the wrong coordinates. And so they couldn't find me. And long story short, this deputy and a game warden showed up and they were just so fun and funny. We ended up talking for an hour and whoever it was left. And unbeknownst to me, I always tried to stay away from boat ramps because that's where the riffraff hang out. And it wasn't on the map and it was dark enough that I didn't know that there was a boat ramp across the way. And they could tell that he had left because they could see the water from his craft. So because I thought, oh my gosh, that was another time where I thought, okay, this is a sign I'm supposed to turn around. I'm not safe. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this by myself. And they were like, oh, don't let this stop you. This, people down here are nice. So, yeah, I ended up staying the night there. I thought I'd have to go into town and I never had problems. I mean, I camped, in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. I'd have fleeted barges in my front yard, so to speak. And yeah, people were nothing but friendly and helpful and very, very curious. Everybody was curious.
Well, and we're just about at an hour here. We don't have to quite end it right now, but maybe I'll just put a quick plug in.
Okay.
And remind people that this is recorded. So if you want to forward it to someone, I'll put this on our Paddle Trails YouTube, which I'll put in chat right now. And also just a quick plug, if anybody is in the Puget Sound area and is not a member of Paddle Trails, to join our club. It's a cheap $25 a year and you got great social paddling training events. just want to throw that in there really quickly. And also, if you're local or not local and you want to do one of these for the club and share your story of some paddling adventure or skill or really anything paddling related, let me know. I'll put my email in the chat, and I'd love to have some extra ideas of things that people might want to hear about. But we don't have to quite end it quite yet, but since people are trickling away, I wanted to throw that in there really quickly. But maybe we will put out one more final call for questions, or if there's anything else you'd like to add, Anne, feel free to throw it in there. Any last takers?
Hi, my name is Tony, and I got the link from, I think, Ann McNally. I was one of the canoe based guides who worked with Doris way back when, and I canoed the river in 1996.
Oh, cool.
But I thought I had read every single book there is to read about canoeing, but I don't think I've read the book that you mentioned. I came in a little bit after the beginning when you started. But there was somebody who came on the river with you. I think you said her name was Elle.
Yeah, her name is Ellen Mcdonough. It's McDonah. And the book is called One Woman's River.
So there's a canoeing adventure book out there that I've missed apparently. So, and I think I got mentioned 2 Mississippi River Facebook groups because I did this pre-Facebook. And I got the Mississippi River Paddlers, but I think you mentioned another one that was like an angels group.
Yep, it's just the Mississippi River Angels, and they'll just ask you one screening question and then you win, you know.
Awesome. Yeah, blast from the past to listen to and look at your photos. Means I have to go up in the attic and dig mine out.
Yeah, yep.
And
about
you
you?
mentioned rivers running free, and last week I was on a panel discussion. It was actually a Girl Scout one. And Judith Nemi, the editor, was one of those, and so she's still around, who may be wanting to share some of her stories that collected in her book.
Well, Anne, for somebody that doesn't like to take a lot of risks, I thought it was not only just a wonderful trip, but boy, a courageous trip too. Congratulations! What a great adventure.
Thank you. You know, there's another Mississippi paddler on this Zoom session. Corey Kaloji did it back in '78. I had mentioned. No comments from Corey.
We actually met another paddler, and I'm really good friends with the guy.
Yeah.
Oh, it's too bad you didn't meet anybody because it's kind of instant bond, right? Or instant bond. Is the case.
It is. Yeah. All right.
Well, I think maybe that'll do it. Final call for questions. Once, twice, sold. Well, Anne, thanks a ton for doing this. I think we all really enjoyed it. There was a lot of positive feedback in the chat if you missed that as well. But yeah, thanks for putting the effort and thanks for staying up a little bit late. Again, McNally said it's 9 p.m. Central time zone. So thanks for powering through.
All right. Well, thanks so much. It's great to see your faces.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Have a good night.
All right. You too. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah. Good night.